Thank you. Thank you for joining us here. So, like I said, my name is Smita Pillai, and I was born and raised in a small town. Like the chairman of Schneider Electric said, small towns are the engine of Asia right now. And I was born in a small town in India, born and raised there. And now I have the privilege of leading global diversity and inclusion for a company called Dow Jones, the flagship brands including Wall Street Journal, Barron's, Financial News, Factiva. And I'm based out of New York. Again, a real privilege to be on the stage with these esteemed panelists. And our discussion today is about the future of Asia. The future of Asia in terms of talent, in terms of infrastructure, and in terms of the sheer growth and the opportunities that the region offers. And before I go into this panel, I do want to acknowledge this forum. It's an amazing forum, and you guys have done a wonderful job pulling together really, really good speakers, a great agenda, and the fact that there is focus on gender diversity in the region. And coming from India, having lived and worked across the region, I know the resilience of women in this region. I know the power of women in this region, and I know personally how far this region can go if we can just collaborate and get women to be working side by side with men in this region. So, Asia, it definitely is an anomaly, isn't it? On one hand, it is a region that has some of the largest growing economies in the world, largest growing countries in the world. It also has demographics that works to its favor. Young demographics, technologically savvy, 5 generations in the workforce. I also was reading that Asia also happens to have a strong aging population with strong purchasing power. So lots of things that are going really well in the country and across the countries in Asia. But at the same time, lots of contradictions. We were just talking behind the stage about this, right? Lots of contradictions. Lack of stability in the region, a lot of differences from, and you all know this, social, geopolitical, religious, political instability, lack of consistent infrastructure and investments. So with all of that kind of contradictions in the region, and with these panelists that we have here, I wanted to bring them in the next 40 minutes, bring their own unique perspectives to you to say, how is this region ready, poised for growth, and what are the challenges that this region will face? So, Shireen, if I may start with you. You have such an incredible background, right? You were just recently appointed the non-executive chairwoman of and board of directors of Bursa Malaysia. You have over 31 years of experience focused on fund management, equity markets. You've also been known in the region as a fierce advocate for gender diversity. And of course, you're the Forbes Top 50 Power Businesswoman. If that is not incredible, I don't know what is. So thank you for all that you've done in this region and being a role model. So my first question to you is, with your background and with your experience in the region, how do you think where we are in Asia, and as we think about how this continent be ready to face the challenges, and inevitably the challenges that come with big growth, as well as grab opportunities that can come with new investments in the region. What are your thoughts on that?
First, I have to say thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm so impressed, just to see everybody here and listen to the opening speeches and talk about areas that I have been, has really interested me, especially because I've been in a male-dominated industry, which is, of course, investment. And now I've assumed this new role as of March to be chairman of the stock exchange. So I am seeing a lot of challenges from a different perspective. But let's start with Asia and how I look at it today. I think that beginning with the world, many countries now are looking very insular. And at the same time, you have the internet and the smartphones, which makes it borderless. Yeah. So you have a very challenging time, which is why I think that many of us have to step forward, and I heard a word earlier today, be brave, and the word is be brave, to come forward with your thoughts. Now in Asia, one of the challenges that we face, I feel, is enforcement. Our enforcement is very slow, and our enforcement is inconsistent. Our enforcement on economic crime, social challenges, and of course environmental issues, which is very dear to my heart. because we don't have a consistent move on enforcement, I feel that this is where Asia is lacking. If we could somehow or rather work a little bit better together, be a little bit faster. I mean, for some of you, we know that they have board meetings that are being held or chaired with people who are in jail. And it's happening today. I don't know how they get away with it. I don't know how resolutions are passed, but it's happening. So these types of instances of economic crime, which are, as a general term, is what I think is holding Asia back. And Asia could, if we could somehow or other string together on the enforcement side, I think we would be much stronger. I mean, on the backdrop, the other thing that Asia has that people forget is we've got very strong central banks. We went through 1997. After that, we all banded together. And you can see now that even during the global financial crisis, which was 10 years later, the central bankers were all there together, able to communicate and talk and discuss how to deal with the issues. And I think that's a plus point of Asia. But on the negative side, this movement or this very prescriptive rules sometimes encourages corruption. And that's an area that we also need to address. Because, corruption is where it benefits a few, although institutions are built to benefit many. And this is one of our other weaknesses of Asia. I don't know if that's where you would like me to...
No, absolutely. I think it sets the context in terms of the complexity in the region, right? And as I was preparing for this, I was also reading in a very recent interview where you talked about CFOs. I think you had specifically called on CFOs to be brave and raise red flags when possible. And I couldn't fail to compare it with various studies that shows that many of our starting speakers also alluded to, which is if you have more gender diversity on the board, if you have more women on the board, they're not afraid to challenge status quo, they're not afraid to call out if something's wrong, and inevitably companies do better. So I couldn't help but compare the two kind of situations and say, when you're calling for CFOs to call the red flags, is that what you were thinking, that if something's going wrong, call out?
Well, I think that where I'm coming from is that many a time, and I'm sure many of the women in this room or men in this room, you sometimes feel very alone because you stand up and you don't accept certain standards or certain norms and you want it to be changed. And over the years, I realized that the only way to be able to progress is if you stand alongside with other people. And I think this is what the Women's Forum is doing, and I think this is exactly how you need to do it. We stand together. And that's the only way. Otherwise, you get singled out, you get bullied, you get named as a, somebody who's odd, somebody or, a gangster, whatever you're named as, because you don't want to follow the norm. You want to be different. But you want to be different not for the sake of being different, but because you know it's wrong.
Yeah.
And this is something I feel that, and I'm not just saying only women, because I know some very wonderful men who also feel the same way, as we heard earlier. We need to stand together. And with the CFOs, the problem is that many CFOs don't dare stand up to their board. So what I was encouraging them to do was to be able to find a board member within that organization and reach out to them on those red flags. Talk to them, see how we can address it. Because the CFOs don't raise a red flag, or the CFOs know about money laundering and they don't bring it up. The companies don't stand a chance, and worse yet, all the stakeholders don't stand a chance.
Yeah.
So it is those CFOs, and I need them to be brave.
Bravo, well said, well said. Absolutely, right? I mean, we could have avoided so many crises if people who knew things were going wrong had the courage or had the community to stand up and speak about that, right? So actually, that's a nice segue into you, Chit-Ying, right? As I look through, where you've accomplished yourself in an incredibly male-dominated industry, and talking about standing tall and standing strong. You're in the real estate business, and as we look through the things that you've accomplished, again, one of the Forbes 50 powerful women in the region. Incredible achievements in terms of infrastructure and investments that you've done and your company's done in the region. As we think about Asia and the growth that Asia as a region offers and the investment potential for companies and countries from outside of Asia for this region, how do you assess the growth potential of the region, and what are the challenges that you see that could be addressed from your point of view?
Well, I first talk about the opportunities that we have in Asia. I think, first of all, we all know Asia is a very complex region. It's also one of the most high growth region. Now, we all also know that high risk, high reward. Now, we all talk about infrastructure, and we think infrastructure in terms of hardware, building bridges, roads, and so on and so forth. But I think fundamentally, we also need to look deeper, the infrastructure of the society. Then we should also examine the diversity in race. And then we also look at the inclusion of gender. And today, gender is really not just about men or women, it's also LGBT. And those kind of infrastructure needs decades, needs centuries of change. And I feel that all of this is important because without the roots, right, you can't really build further. You can't really build. You can't really build on something which is not stable. So the foundation is very, very fundamental. So how do you actually put all of this diversity in one region together? And that means that we need to go through a lot of process of patience and tolerance. The opportunity here is not just about really the building of roads, like I said, but what is also very important is the infrastructure for the law. So I talk first about the setting the record for the complexity of cultures. Then we move on to the infrastructure for law. Now, what I'm trying to say is this: do we have proper infrastructure for intellectual property rights, your telecommunications, and also, the list goes on. And then we look at the world, how the world look at Asia. They see a lot of opportunity, they don't understand it. I'm Asian from Singapore, and I have problem doing business in China. Why? Because even in China itself, you have 100 over different dialect groups. If you're from Beijing, you may not understand people from Shanghai, and vice versa. And similarly, like in Singapore, we have the luxury of a very, very set infrastructure. Our government actually sets the tone of what racial means to us, what diversity means to us. But in Asia, if you want to be like Singapore, we call it the 101 of Asia, then I think it's not just the one country, but it actually requires the whole region to band together. So I always love the idea of ASEAN. I don't really think that the Eurozone is as laissez-faire as ASEAN. Because in what we're trying to do is in Asia, we're trying to be tolerant of each other's culture. We try to form economic ties and so on. We don't have to go so much into the roots of what Euro is doing. But I think that it's a very, very good start. And I think that for a lot of these legislation, if we can have similar legislation across, we can first start with ASEAN, and then we include Japan, China, and Korea, for example, then I think it will make doing business easier. And when you want people to invest in you, you have to be transparent. And I think transparency is the other issue that we don't have in Asia, because we don't have the infrastructure of law. And then also that sometimes we want democracy, sometimes we don't want democracy, and democracy really isn't for everyone. And some countries works better without democracy. Case in point would be China. And because you need just that amount of time to change centuries of tradition. You need a very strong leader. You need to be able to manage the entire country without having to worry that tomorrow you're not going to be on that seat anymore.
It is, I mean, both of you made a lot of points which clearly kind of says, often people outside of Asia think of Asia as a country, right? Or just Asia. Let's have a strategy for Asia. I've often heard businesses outside of Asia as not realizing that there are all these complexities within Asia as a country, right? So some of the things that I wanted to highlight about Asia as it compares to the top dynamics in the region, I thought was very interesting was, number one, aging Asia. Right, so some of the, a very unique factor that kind of stuck out for me was people over 50 years, so age more than 50 years, expected to be 1 billion people by 2025 with significant purchasing power. That's one dynamic. Number two, working women. Since we're talking about women, right? This might surprise some of you that the number of working women in Asia is expected to rise much higher than in US and Europe. So when we're talking about gender equality, de facto, women entering the workforce is going to be much higher than those entering in the workforce in US and Europe. And that's quite an eye-opening statement. But here the question is, are we able to retain these talented young women in the workforce and keep them moving in the workforce? The third is digital natives, right? As we think about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, all increasingly tech savvy. They haven't seen anything but technology, right, since they've come of age. And we're talking about this generation that's coming up in Asia. It's a huge population in Asia. The fourth is sharing economy, right? And you might, Chiching, relate to it the most, which is built around shared resources, right? Whether it's Uber, whether it's Airbnb, more and more Asian cities are moving towards that. And the fifth and the final one is small city growth, which is tier 2 cities across Asia growing at a much faster rate than tier 1. So when you think about all these dynamics, right, and particularly as you think about the talent, because a few of these is around talent, as the aging workforce gets out and the young population gets in, women getting in, as you're thinking about that, and you clearly talked about, it's not just about gender diversity, right? You've got to talk about bringing everyone into the workforce. How would you, and this question could be, either of you could take it, how do you see this as, again, an opportunity that corporations can grab, governments can grab across Asia? What can be done in this continent across the different countries to keep the talent in the pipeline, to engage the talent, and make sure it's a meaningful investment for countries outside of Asia? Either of you can take it.
Okay, so I think that much as we say that Asia has an aging population, of course in the workforce we're looking for younger talent. Now, the younger people are less money sensitive. And I say this with a lot of reservation because I'm from Singapore. And most of us are well-fed. But, like we also trade in Indonesia, and then we also trade in China. So everyone has different needs. In Singapore, for example, if I wanted to retain a workforce, I have to tell them that there is a sense of purpose in what you're doing. So when we started the company, we said, okay, we want to change the luxury market in residential. And we want to show the men what luxury residential really means. And so we went ahead and then we talked to Ritz-Carlton, and we have the first Ritz-Carlton residences outside of North America. And then a lot of people joined the company because they think that this is a company that's going to change and make changes. So we attracted a lot of women, because I think women I don't know why we like to champion things, you know, but, and we want to leave a legacy. And therefore, you know, that's how we managed to attract a lot of young women, firstly, and then men join. And so I think that, like, for an advanced city like Singapore, the retention really is to attract them and tell them that they're doing something meaningful in life. So that's Singapore. And if you have, in a lesser well-to-do country like Indonesia, so what we do is we create an extremely good environment for them to stay. So in our project, which is a hospitality project in Batam, Indonesia, which is 30 minutes from here, we have the best Wi-Fi and the best dormitory on the island for any workforce. And that sort of thing, even though it's very, very small, attracts people to stay because there's a sense of pride. Yeah. That they're staying in the best, they work for the best company, and we also give them a lot of activities. Now, having this activities promotes a lot of camaraderie between fellow colleagues. We do a lot of team building as well, both for our hospitality business as well as head office. So to create this wonderful infrastructure within the corporate, and if you take it to a bigger level, right, I mean, a lot of people like to stay in Singapore because it's very comfortable to live in, it's very clean, except for today because of the haze, but we're not responsible for that either. So that kind of thing attracts people to come. So wonderful environment, sense of purpose, and then wonderful colleagues to work together with. I think that's something that we constantly need to promote.
Just from the financial sector, I think that what I've seen during my years is that there's a huge intake of women in the early years, whether it's in insurance or stockbroking. And then when they get married, there is the pressure for them to leave. And that's been a very sad state for me to watch. Many of them had no choice. They were under pressure at home. So one of the things that I have seen happen over the years is that many companies now are allowing women to work, and of course with the aid of the internet and smartphones, they're able to do their insurance selling from home, broking from home. Yeah. Maybe not institutional broking, but certainly some form of broking, which allows them to still have a revenue and a connection with working. Because I think what is really important is that women continue to work to empower themselves. Because at the end of the day, it is the financial independence which allows you to be empowered. Because women, you know, my age group, the older age group, they, you know, they're dependent on their spouses, many of them, and if the spouse decides, you know, to cut the credit card, they don't know what to do. Because they've never worked in a day in their life. They may be trained lawyers, they may be trained engineers, but they've never worked because they didn't have to, and then suddenly later on in their lives, in their late 50s and early 60s, they're suddenly thrown this part of an angle which they suddenly have to become self-reliant. So I think that as people enter the workforce today and as companies look to employ, we all have to start to think about reskilling. Because the internet or the world of smartphones is moving so fast that even the young kids are getting out of date. And some of them are saying to me, but we're out of date, we don't even know what these new things are. Yeah. So I do think there'll come a point where we hit a wall, and everyone says, wait a minute. But it is a process of trying to have the balance. You know, if you want to have a family and you want to have kids and you want to have that oversight, the good thing about technology is that you can do it from your house, but you have to allow the companies to allow you to do that. I think that is a very important structure that we need. Unfortunately, not all companies adopt it. And then when the women leave, when they come back, generally they come back at a lower rank.
Yeah.
So this is something that still continues today, which I see in many corporations.
Yeah.
And it needs to be addressed. And when the administration or the governments can start to enforce it, whether it's at an ASEAN level, whether it's at a global level through a G7, G20, it would be very good, because then we would start to have very, very clear rules that if you can do something via technology, then why not?
Right.
Why do you have to physically be in the office? Why can't you do it through technology? And I think that that would be one of the ways to keep women involved, empowered, and part of the whole ecosystem, while at the same time have that moment where they need to be at home.
Yeah. It's incredibly hard, right? I mean, as a working woman and as a working mother, I can relate to it. So just from a personal point of view, I have 3 children under the age of 9. And that is incredibly difficult to manage with a global career and kind of traveling and late night conference calls. You can't tuck your children into bed. Those are all personal issues, but at the same time, they become issues of the company. If more than 60% of the graduates are going to be women, and those are your talent that's getting into the workforce, it no longer remains a women's issue. It becomes a workforce issue. So I do want to, I'm conscious of time, but I think it'll be a big miss if I don't ask something about your own personal experience. As incredible women leaders yourselves, and you've risen through the ranks, you've worked through an incredibly complex system here. Well, I think it is complex anywhere in the world for women. But particularly in Asia, with the cultural background and the nuances and the societal expectations of a working mother, a wife, a friend, a daughter. Anything that you would like to share, and maybe Shireen, we can start with you, about as you were growing through the ranks, are there instances or something that you want to share that was learning moment for you that you can share with the audience here in terms of, if you want to be successful, these are some of the challenges you will have to overcome, no matter what the support system is or there isn't?
My goodness, there's so many challenges, I don't know where to start. I suppose for anyone who's in an organization, my first bit of guidance is you need to find somebody who can believe in you and you believe in them within your organization. And whether whether it's mentoring, whether it's just talking, you need to have that linkage. When I was in AIG, I was very fortunate, although being based in Malaysia, to have my boss in New York who did believe in what I was doing and did trust my judgment. So I think that's a very important point. The other one, I think that what's important is to be able to learn to listen. Many times, people don't listen. They don't allow people to finish what they're saying. And because of this life now of Twitter and all these short things, short messaging, many people don't understand exactly what the story is about. And then they just take that little bit and they think, okay, I've got it. And so listening and reading in full is something that I think that everybody really needs to do, and don't stop doing it.
Thank you. Very well said. Very well said.
Well,
thank you.
Well, for me, I founded the company together with another woman. Her name is Lenny. And I think today we're still the only women-founded real estate listed company in Singapore, and this is Singapore. This is not meant to brag, but I think it's very sad because I would like to have more of me, more of us. And therefore, when we took that journey, it was very, very lonely. I mean, I was just glad that there were 2 of us. Because, the difference between men and women, when especially, I mean, I think it's getting better, but when we first started, it was very difficult because, the main difference is that when a woman when a very beautiful woman walked into the room with a bunch of ladies, she's a bitch. But when a man walks, a very good-looking, handsome, well-dressed man walk into the room with men, they say, I want to be like him. So that mentality, we need to change as women. We have to band together. We have to band together,
Yeah.
just like men band together. We are too focused in picking on each other that we forgot that we are actually the same gender. And if we don't help ourselves, we can't expect men to do that.
Well said.
And the other thing I want to say also is that I'm not really for the fact that there should be law against, or rather law requiring companies to hire women. In my company, we have 7 members on the board. So we have 4 women and 3 men. I cannot imagine if I walk to another room and I'm handing out my card and they see, oh, so you're one of the quota. I believe in may the best man win. I believe that if there is legislation, then let the legislation make the environment for working conducive for women. Give incentives. Singapore government is very good in giving incentives. You want to be green, give you 3% extra GFA so you can sell the houses and so on and so forth. So these are the things that we can do so that it is not something that people detest, but something that people celebrate. So I think that's what the legislators here can help us do. And one of the other things that I always think of is, people always say that behind this very successful man, there is always a woman. But behind a very successful, behind a failed woman, there is always that one man. Don't be that man.
Well said. Well said.
So I think that being supportive from all different levels is very important. The centuries and centuries of tradition that women must stay at home, take care of family, that has to change. And that starts from you. You can go back and you can educate everybody that you know, not just your children, that times have changed. Women can go out there and work. We support them. And the world will definitely be a better place because when you have diversity, you have more views, it makes your business more robust, it makes your country definitely more welcoming to other investors. And I think that builds a better society.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you so much. Very, very well said. Thank you, thank you. So, I do agree, right, in kind of just capturing the essence of the discussion. Of course, we started with, the complexities of the region, which are many, the challenges in the region, which are many, and the opportunities. I think we want to end on the fact that it's a positive note, right? It's a region that is on the cusp of incredible growth. It's a region that can really make or break the globe, actually, in terms of growth, in terms of opportunities for everyone. And finally, when it comes to gender inclusion, it is not about either or. It's not about women, to your point, both of you made that point about, it's not about women winning at the cost of men, or because women win, men lose, right? It is a time now where we all need to work together towards an inclusive growth of companies, economies, countries. And that's the only way the globe can go further, right? Whether it's climate change, whether it's economy, whether it's jobs or growth. So thank you so much. Really appreciated your time. And thank you, audience. You all were lovely. Thank you. Thank you.